Good evening, everybody. This is the Israelites in the Wilderness, session 13, and we are on to Numbers 27. It's a short chapter, and we see Zelophehad's daughters. They didn't have any brothers, or their father had also died away, so they would receive property as an inheritance among their father's relatives because their father died in the desert without any son. So what we see that this chapter tells us about this episode is that God cares for all the people, right? He makes provision for even this very unique case of daughters possessing their father's inheritance. Normally, the inheritance is passed down to the son. But in this case, there's no son. So God makes provision for the daughters to possess the father's inheritance. So they will be given the right to own the land that rightfully belongs to their father. Then after that, we see that the Lord told Moses he would let Moses see the land he had given the Israelites. He would see the land from the mountain in the Abarim range and then be gathered to his people. Be gathered to his people means he will die. Yeah, like go to his ancestors. And the reason that he was not allowed to go into the land is he had disobeyed God's command to honor God as holy before the community that rebelled at the waters in the desert of Zin. So we see for this part of the story, the message is that the consequence of Moses' disobedience to God, that was in Numbers chapter 20, verse 12, it catches up on him. So it takes time for consequences of our sin to catch up on us. And for Moses, that was since Numbers 20, and that's only about 7 chapters ago. And he does not get to enter the promised land. However, God allows him to peer into the land before he dies, right? To have a look. And the lesson we learn is whatever other people's sin, we have to be responsible for our own response, our own behavior, especially where it concerns God's honor and holiness. So this is saying that when people sin, it doesn't give us a right to sin. Okay? When people sin, it does not give us a right to sin as well. Yeah, so they have done something wrong. It doesn't mean that we also can go and do something wrong because they did something wrong. Okay, so that is a personal blow to Moses, because after all that he has been through, all these many years of serving God faithfully, he is not going to enter the land. We for ourselves may think we serve God faithfully and deserve better, but we need to know that God is holy. He wants his people, both leaders and followers, to maintain our testimony for the people who are watching. Yeah, our testimony is very important for others. That's something that we must always remember. Our testimony is very important. It's not just for ourselves, but it's also for other people who are watching. And so the story continues that Moses, now that this is his situation, right, he asked the Lord to appoint a man over the community to lead them because he's going to die. He's going to die, so the people will not have him as the leader to continue. And he asked God to appoint a man to lead them so that the Lord's people would not be like sheep without a shepherd. And something similar, when Jesus came, he looked at Jerusalem and saw that they were like sheep without a shepherd. They were all over the place, spiritually with God. Yeah, and the lesson we learn here from Moses is it may be a disappointment for Moses But Moses does not let the news that he will not enter the promised land affect his concern for the community. Yeah, so this is something, again, special about Moses in his personal development. You see that even though he is not getting to enter the promised land, he doesn't become so upset that he doesn't care about people anymore. Because he stays focused. He stays focused on his concern for God's people. And so you see that he asked God to appoint a man to take over his role as the leader so that they have someone to lead them like a shepherd. Yeah, and so he is a picture of Jesus like that all these years. He's a picture of like Jesus being a shepherd over Israel. Moses knows the people and he continues to care for their future well-being, even though, you know, he might have the, you can say he has the right to go and get angry and bitter with the people because, you know, the people make him so frustrated the last time at chapter 20 that he disobeyed God. Yeah, but here we see Moses shows that he can deal with negative emotions and remain clear about the overall picture. Yeah, he can deal with the negative emotions and remain clear about the important overall picture. It's not just about himself. He's able to put aside his own personal feelings to focus on the continuity of leadership for the bigger community of Israel. That's something, you know, where he can see beyond himself. And for himself, Moses also knows where he stands with God. Remember, God gave him that credit of being the humblest man on the face of the earth. He knows where he stands with God. And if we look at Hebrews chapter 3, verse 5, it says that he was faithful as a servant in all God's house, testifying as to what would be said in the future. And that is why, although he was not allowed to enter the promised land, God still granted him a view of the land. Some people say, some people say that Moses was not allowed into the promised land because of a spiritual significance, because he represents the law, the Old Testament law. Moses represents the Old Testament law. So Old Testament, if you follow Old Testament, you can't enter the promised land. You will never be good enough to enter into the promised land. But this is where Joshua, who represents Jesus, takes over. And that is, you enter the land by grace. Yeah, so you might hear some teaching, something along this line about the difference between Moses not entering the promised land and Joshua being the one to lead them into the promised land. So Moses kind of like is representing the law. The law cannot help us to enter the promised land. But Jesus, represented by Joshua, is able to lead us into the promised land of God. Okay, so the story continues that the Lord told Moses to commission Joshua in a ceremony with Eleazar and the entire assembly present, and give him some of his authority for the community to obey him. And once again, you see, as always, the Bible tells us Moses did as the Lord commanded him. And he laid his hand on Joshua and commissioned him as the Lord instructed. The message for us is God tells Moses, give Joshua the authority he needs to lead the community. Yeah, Joshua takes over his position. Joshua needs to have that authority. And Moses is to do this, give Joshua the authority in a ceremony to transfer his authority to Joshua. And this is to be witnessed by the priest. Eleazar is the priest taking over from his father, Phinehas. Yeah, this is to be witnessed by the priest and the whole community. And Moses does so to let the community know God's will and accept Joshua's leadership. Moses shows again that he is obedient to what God commands him. Yeah, now he shows that he is an inspiration and testimony, right? So Moses is an inspiration and a testimony on how to handle our disappointment and sadness. Yeah, he has tried his sincere and honest best to do what God asked of him all these years. And we actually have a verse in 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 2, that talks about this principle, right? This principle of life. It is required that those who have been given a trust must prove faithful. So God has trusted Moses to lead the people of Israel, and he has proven to be faithful. Even though he made that one mistake, just as he say, he is faithful as a servant in all God's house. Yeah, he's faithful as a servant in all God's house, right? So he has proven the trust that he must be faithful. So like Moses, a faithful servant of God, it is right for us to put all our personal, individual expectations and emotions in perspective, right? Of God's more important plans and concerns for the greater good of his community. Yeah, so as for us to learn to be a faithful servant like Moses, this is what we ought to do. Put all our personal, individual expectations and emotions in perspective. So we need to learn to balance and manage ourselves, because we need to fulfill God's greater plans and concerns for his people. So that is chapter 27, a very brief chapter from Numbers. Now we move on to Numbers chapters 28 and 29. And when you look at chapters 28 and 29, it's all about the festivals and offerings. Festivals and offerings to God. And basically, we see that it is the calendar of worship. So in these two chapters, it gives us all the religious offerings and sacrifices that Israel is to make to God. Okay, all the sacrifices and worship offerings that they were to make to God in their festivals. So for the message and significance, we see that as Israel prepares to enter Canaan, the promised land, it is important for them to have an overall view of maintaining a consistent relationship with God. Okay, overall view. So something like a table, they have a table, and this table, it lists down how they can maintain a consistent relationship with God. And Moses provides a summary of the worship practices for the Israelites. God provides a summary for the Israelites through Moses. And this calendar through the year is to enable them to remain devoted and depend on God by putting God in the center of life. It's a little bit like God telling us, okay, all the important Christian events for the year, something like that. Okay, so that's what they have here. And so in Numbers chapter 28, it starts off with the daily offerings. Daily means every day. So every day, that is in the morning and evening, they are supposed to sacrifice a lamb with a flour and drink offering. And this is also mentioned in Exodus chapter 20 and verse 38 to 43. And God's idea is, there also I will meet with the Israelites. So that idea is God is present. Yeah, when we make the daily offerings, God is present. When we spend time with God, God is present. And also for God's people, even for us today, it is appropriate for us to begin and end our day with a statement of trust in God, an expression of our devotion to Him. Right? We start the day with God and we end the day with God. Let's take a look at some of these verses. Psalm 5. It's Psalm because it's a song. No S, not Psalms. Psalm 5 verse 3. Can someone help us read that one?
Psalm 5, verse 3. In the morning, Lord, you hear my voice. In the morning, I lay my request before you and wait expectantly.
Okay, thank you. So that is in the morning. We'll skip over to 55 verse 17 first because go by order. Psalm 55 verse 17. Could somebody help us? Psalm 55 verse 17.
Psalm 55 verse 17. Evening, morning, and noon, I cry out in distress, and he hears my voice.
Thank you, Irene. So there you go, calling out to God, morning, noon, and evening. So 3 times for this psalmist, right? This is David calling out to God 3 times a day. 141, Psalm 141 verse 2.
Psalm 141 verse 2. May my prayer be set before you like incense. May the lifting up of my hands be like the evening sacrifice.
Thank you, Mac. Okay, so there you see now it is the prayer is like incense going up to God, right? And it is like the evening sacrifice when he lift up his hands. Oh, so this is an interesting concept. One of the reasons we lift up our hands, besides praising God, this lifting up my hands be like the evening sacrifice. So a sacrifice of worship, a sacrifice of praise, a sacrifice to express trust and devotion to God. So that's the Israelites with their daily offerings, and for us with the Christian equivalent. Now then, verses 9 and 10 of chapter 27, you see Sabbath offerings. Now Sabbath means something like the day of rest. So for us, it is Sunday, but for the Jews, for the Israelites, it's normally a Saturday. Okay, whatever it is a day of rest. We don't worry whether it's Saturday or Sunday. The concept is, the principle is the same. So besides the daily offering in the morning and evening, okay, they on the Sabbath, regular weekly Sabbath, they are to offer 2 extra lambs. Yes, and Exodus 31, 13 to 17 tells us the Sabbath is a sign of a lasting covenant between the Lord and the Israelites forever, and it is a day of rest. So here's a lesson for us. Our Sabbath, when we go to church and observe Sunday Sabbath, right, it is a sign of a lasting covenant between God and us. Yeah, so that is a very important reason. Okay, if we have never been clear, this is a very important reason for us to observe our Sunday Sabbath as Christians. It's a lasting covenant between God and us. Okay, so Sunday for us, that would be for Christians. So somebody may ask, why do we observe on Sunday when they observe on Saturday? Right? Okay. So for them, all right, for them, the history goes all the way back to Genesis chapter 1 when God created. Okay. Sunday is the first day, and then the Sabbath is actually Saturday, the 7th day when God rested. Okay, so that explains for the Israelites. Sabbath is actually Saturday because when we follow the 7 days of creation, Sunday is the first day. Now, when it comes to us as Christians, why we observe Sunday as our Sabbath is number one is historically you know, when the Roman Empire, they came up with a calendar, okay, Sunday, the word Sunday is actually the day when they worship the sun. Yeah, Sunday, S-U-N, not S-U-N, sorry, S-U-N, correct. S-U-N, Sunday is the day that the Roman Empire, where the Christian Empire at that time, in that sense, okay, they have a Sunday that is a day to worship the sun. But when they became Christians, okay, they wanted a day to commemorate the equivalent of worshiping God. They chose the Sunday, but we don't think of it as a pagan day because, why? The Lord Jesus rose on the first day, when Jesus was resurrected on the first day of the week. And what is the first day of the week again?
Sunday.
What is the first day of the week again?
Sunday.
Sunday, correct. Okay, so the first day of the week is Sunday. And for us, we follow Christ, the resurrection day of Christ. Look at Matthew chapter 28. Matthew 28. Can somebody turn to Matthew 28 and help us to read it?
The whole chapter.
Oh, no, verse 1, verse 1.
Okay. Matthew 28, verse 1. After the Sabbath, at dawn on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to look at the tomb.
Okay, thank you, Matt. So there you see, after the Sabbath, which for the Jews is a Saturday, at dawn on the first day of the week, and that is Sunday. Right? Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to visit the tomb, and that was the day of Jesus' resurrection. So this is the difference. The Jews, they have the Sabbath on the Saturday. For us as Christians, although we follow the pagan Sunday, it's actually a replacement, all right, for the pagans who become Christians. Sabbath day is not worshiping the sun anymore, but worshiping the S-O-N of God. And that is due to the fact that Jesus is, more importantly, resurrected on the Sunday. So that's the Sabbath offerings. And so for us, it's a lasting covenant also between God and us. And it's a day of rest. And it's a day that we go to worship God. Then we have the monthly offerings on from verses 11 to 15. Monthly means following the new moon. The new moon offering on the first of the month. And they offer 2 bulls, a ram, and 7-year-old lambs, all without defect. Okay, so that must be without blemish, without wounds, that the lambs must not be hurt or injured or anything defective. So these offerings were accompanied with a grain offering and a drink offering. And they also had to sacrifice a goat as a sin offering. Now, Isaiah chapter 1 verse 14 shows how the people corrupted these festivals in time. And it kind of gives us that warning that our observance of the things God commands can turn into empty rituals. Yeah, it can turn into empty rituals that make God very tired of all these things. And they don't honor him. Yeah, so you see all these things about our going to Sunday church, we are praying, we are doing our daily devotion and so on, right? They are significant, they have special meaning, like what we can see here, right? They talk about our trust in God and our devotion to God. They talk about our covenant with God to worship and to rest. And they talk about all these things that, you know, if we just do as empty rituals, then they become meaningless and God is not honored. So what is the point of all these? This is the daily, weekly, monthly sacrifices emphasize the importance of regular ongoing communication with God. whose presence dwells with them, just as God's presence goes with us. Yes. So all these daily, everyday, weekly, monthly sacrifices show that it's very important that we maintain communication with God who is with us. Can you imagine, like, you have a friend or somebody with you and the whole day you don't talk to your friend? You don't talk to God. The whole day you don't talk to God. You treat him like he doesn't exist. Okay, then there's no relationship with him. And so God is telling the people, relationship with me is regular and you must keep it consistent. And they are not to restrict their religious commitment to the annual festivals, not just every year, one time, okay? So in the same way for us as Christians, our commitment to God should not be only on important or special occasions like birthday, funeral, Good Friday, Easter, Christmas. Yeah, these are normally the times when people go to church. Yeah, people go to church because there are these special occasions. But the point of what God is telling the Israelites is, no, your communication, your relationship with me is not only on these special occasions. It is throughout the year, on a daily basis, weekly, and monthly. So let's take a look at a point, all right, a point that we may not realize when we look at burnt offerings. Okay, offerings by burning. So burnt offerings, let me maybe put it clear. Burnt offerings, that is significance. Significance in the offerings, the burnt offerings to God. We can read about the burnt offerings, the description in Leviticus 1. Okay, basically the burnt offering is the whole animal will be cut up into pieces, placed on the altar and burnt to God. So a burnt offering is a method to render a physical sacrifice to God, who is spirit. You think about it, huh? Okay, in most cases, you see when people worship, normally they burn. Yeah, when they worship, normally they burn. Okay, so like, yeah. So why they burn? It is because it is a way to, can I say, convert or render the visible into the world of the invisible. A way to bridge our physical to the spiritual. And burnt offering, normally when the animal pieces are burnt and sacrificed to God, the smoke symbolically enters the nostrils of God with a sweet aroma that pleases God. So burnt offering is something physical that in a way is kind of like a conversion to a spiritual value. And so this tells us that all that we offer to God, whether in service, you know, we serve God in the church, perhaps, you sacrifice to God, you speak, you know, the words you speak in offering to God, or the words that you say to encourage people as offering to God, evangelism and your actions, all that we offer to God should be pleasing to God. Just as the smoke symbolically enters the nostrils of God with a sweet aroma. Second significance in the burnt offering is the blood. The blood, and we know that the blood is the life of the sacrifice. Okay, the blood is the life of the sacrifice. And this blood is poured out on the altar for a burnt offering as an atonement. What do we mean by atonement? Atonement is to substitute, to pay a price. Yeah, substitute, to pay a price that God demands for our sin. Our sin needs some form of atonement or sacrifice or payment. Okay, and that is death, right? Death. So, good thing about God in being gracious to us is He offers us animal blood to stand in for us temporarily. stand in for us temporarily, where these people, the Israelites, are concerned in the physical rituals. Okay, so blood is poured out on the altar as an atonement for the worshipper. So instead of the worshipper killing himself or herself to offer the blood to God, an animal dies in the worshipper's place to represent taking the punishment. Okay, and so it is a returning life to the giver of all life, for that means God, the creator, for our offense or violation of the sinless life that God created us to live. So instead of living a sinless life, we live a sinful life. And because of the sinful life we live, we have to die, and that is, we have to offer our blood back to God. But God be praised, in the Old Testament, yeah, it is, this blood is offered symbolically represented by an animal. So the principle is, when we sin, we have to pay back the price of our sin with our life. That is our blood. But the blood of the animal, that is the life, that is poured out on the altar, is substituted for our own to pay the price of our sins. But here's the truth about that practice that God let the Israelites practice. In actual fact, the life of an animal cannot pay for the life of a person. Okay, the life of an animal is inadequate to pay for the life of a person. Let me give an example. You take a slave and a king. People will not hesitate to kill a slave anytime, right? People will not hesitate to kill a slave anytime, or even a very common person, a commoner. But people will hesitate to kill a king or a queen or a prince. So that is the kind of value and honor given to a king or a prince. So the life of an animal is not adequate to pay for our lives. And that is why later on, God let Jesus come to pay the price for our sin. And Jesus, by doing that, is substitute of a sinless human life for a sinful human life. Can you see? We are sinful. We deserve to pay the price, that is death. But because Jesus is sinless, he did not deserve to die. He can substitute to die in our place. And so Jesus brought us back to God with the price of his sinless blood. So that is the point of the blood, okay, to substitute and buy us back to God with the blood. But only Jesus' blood is effective. The animal blood is only a substitute temporarily to remind us that we need a sinless human being to die for a sinful human being. Okay, so the third point of the significance of a burnt offering is the animal must be unblemished and perfect, because God requires nothing short of absolute purity. The animal must not have any blemish. And this indicates God's desire and requirement of his people, of his community, of his kingdom of heaven, that means all of us, to be of absolute purity, such that there is no contamination or impurity of sin or wrong. So that when we go to heaven, right, we will not bring sin into heaven and make heaven like earth like that. You see, earth is full of problems and sins. Yeah. So that tells us we are to be a holy people. As Jesus made us holy by his sacrificial death on the cross, we are to live as a holy people similarly by the sacrifice of our lives to be wholly surrendered to God. That is the third significance of the burnt offering. The fourth significance, when they offer a burnt offering, nothing is returned to the worshipper. So the whole animal is sacrificed on the altar, unlike other kinds of offerings, other kinds of offerings, certain parts of the animal, certain parts are returned to the worshipper. But for burnt offering, nothing is returned to the worshipper, and it signifies God's complete ownership. It signifies that God owns us. See, at the first level, we are created by God, so we belong to God already. Then when we sin, right, when we sin and we go away from God, we are redeemed by God. So 2 times God shows that we belong to him. First time when we are created by him, we belong to him. And then when we sin, and then we are redeemed by God, again, God buys us back through the blood of Jesus. Okay, so at 2 levels, we belong to God. And so we no longer belong to ourselves, but to God. And if you remember Exodus chapter 19, God says, if you obey my commandments, you are my treasured possession. Yeah, if we obey God's commandments, we are God's treasured possession. So we are God's treasured people and possession. He owns us. Nothing in that burnt offering is returned to the worshipper. God has complete ownership of us. Now, the 5th point is the offerings are made publicly. Okay, offerings are made publicly as expressions of faith, that's 1, and obedience. And the worshipper who makes the offering is required to be ritually pure for the Israelites before the offering is presented. So the person must cleanse himself, something similar to a sort of ritual washing. Okay, ritual washing before the person offers the sacrifice. So that is a public expression of faith and obedience, something like us, like that. And this points to God's desire that the offerings we make to him, including ourselves as living sacrifices, you know, Romans 12, 1-2 says, offer your bodies as living sacrifices. Yeah. So it should remind us of the need to be pure and right as we worship God, not just for show in public, right? But also the meaning behind that is that as people of God, we should be pure and right inside as well when we come to worship God. So those are the important points to bear in mind when the Bible talks about burnt offerings. Okay, burnt offerings. So let's move on now to continue with Numbers 28 and 29, the calendar of worship, where we talk about the festivals that include specific offerings besides the regular burnt offerings. Okay, so the common ones, the very famous ones we know, this list starts off with the Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And you can read for this, the rest of this also in Deuteronomy chapter 16. Okay, so for the Passover, it's celebrated on the 14th day of the first month. And this is the spiritual calendar. Okay, spiritual calendar, the first month of the spiritual new year. Yeah, that's what it is, the first month of the spiritual new year. A Passover lamb is killed by each family, and then the Feast of the Unleavened Bread is celebrated during the 7 days after Passover. So total will be 8 days. All right, 8 days total. The 14th day will be Passover, and then from the 15th to the 22nd, that will be Feast of the Unleavened Bread. You can find the details once again if you want to review. The details are in Exodus chapter 12, verses 14 to 20. And on the first day, the 2 young bulls, 1 ram, 7 first-year lambs, and a goat are offered as a sin offering. And this feast marked the beginning of the barley harvest. Okay, so this is actually a harvest festival. Yeah, harvest festival. And for the equivalent for us, it will be March to April period. So you know the Passover is Good Friday. And when we look every year at Good Friday, we see that it happens on either March or April. Yeah, Good Friday, the Passover, the timing falls sometime in March to April. And unleavened bread was made from the newly harvested barley grain without adding yeast and was eaten as the first sign of coming festivals that year. Now, this is interesting because this is a dual commemoration, two events together. Two events come together very closely, one after the other. And it is Passover and unleavened bread. It shows two aspects of God's act of worship, of salvation. Yeah, God's act of salvation, it shows two aspects. First one is the deliverance of Israel from Egypt. That is the Passover. That's number one, deliverance. And for us, spiritually, God delivers us from slavery to sin and death. So we are given new life through Christ. Can you see? There are two levels. Yeah, Passover for the Israelites is actually saving them out from Egypt. But for Christians, the spiritual equivalent is Jesus saves us from slavery to sin and death, eternal death. That's the Passover. Then you have unleavened bread, which is sustaining the people in their escape from Egypt. See, they are supposed to make unleavened bread and eat it when they escape, when they flee from Egypt. Right? And this bread, which is quite hard, and because it's not leavened with yeast, it is quite hard. Yeah, so the bread without yeast symbolizes the absence of sin because they don't put yeast. Yeast represents sin. Right, so the bread without yeast symbolizes the absence of sin among the community as they escape and run away toward the life of the promised land, the eternal life of God. And this indicates for us Christians the need for Christian feeding. Unleavened bread is the bread that we eat, the bread that is Christ, right? The need for Christian feeding that keeps God's people from the power, the presence, and the influence of sin in our Christian journey to full life in Christ. In John chapter 10, verse 10, Jesus says, I come to give them abundant life. Yeah, so for them, the unleavened bread actually talks about absence of sin, and we are being sustained by Christ, our bread. Bread from heaven, spiritual bread from heaven. So that is the Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Then it is followed later on by the Feast of Weeks in verses 26 to 31. Feast of Weeks is not so famous. What we know is Pentecost. The more common name for us is Pentecost, and it has another name, the Day of First Fruits. So this time there is a harvest, which is a wheat harvest. Just now it was a barley harvest. Down here was a barley harvest for unleavened bread, but here it is a wheat harvest. Well, you can see the harvests are just coming time for God's people to celebrate. Yeah. And that is 50 days later, so 7 weeks. Yeah, 7 weeks. And you can read more about it in Exodus 34, verse 22. And this Feast of Weeks is also a sacred gathering time for Israel when they do no regular work. That means it's a holiday, sort of like a holiday like that. Okay, and it's a sacred gathering time for Israel because they need to go to Jerusalem to celebrate it. So Passover, they need to go to Jerusalem to celebrate. Pentecost, they also need to go to Jerusalem to celebrate. And that's where, Acts chapter 2, when the Holy Spirit came on the believers, the disciples of Jesus, and then they spoke in tongues, and then Peter preached a sermon, and there were Jews from all over the world. They were there for this festival called Pentecost, or Feast of Weeks, the first fruits of the wheat harvest. That's the reason they were there. And they are to present a burnt offering. Remember burnt offering? Just now we talked about the 5 significances. As they also offer thanks for the harvest. So besides the burnt offerings, they also offer first fruit offerings of the wheat harvest. Okay, they offer the first fruits of the wheat harvest. We see that God wants his people to live in an ongoing state of dependence on him and in constant devotion to him. See, similarly, our own life should be lived in constant awareness of both the atonement God made for us and the thanksgiving for the harvest that we have in life. Yeah, we have lots of harvests. And in Acts chapter 2, through the coming of the Holy Spirit, the believers, the disciples of Jesus, made a harvest of souls. And that is the first fruits of the church of believers. See how the significance is connected. The details in the celebration is actually symbolizing what the Christian truth is about as well. Yeah, whatever God tells them to do is a parallel Christian symbol for the church. So the harvest of souls which is the first fruits of the church of believers, was birthed among the Jews in Jerusalem in Acts chapter 2, when the Holy Spirit first came on the disciples. Then the other thing we can think about is the harvest of fruit in our personal lives and the salvation of souls we read through evangelism. Okay, you can see down here that there's a lot of bright growth. There's a lot of harvesting. Yes, the fruit of the Spirit. Yes, so consider the fruit of the Spirit in our personal lives, where we have the harvest of love, joy, peace, and so on. And then we also have a harvest of salvation, people who receive Christ. So that is the important point about Pentecost, actually about the harvest. Then the next one is a Feast of Trumpets. Now we move on to chapter 29, and this is held on the first day. Feast of Trumpets is first day of the 7th month. And for them, it became the time of the new year. This is the secular calendar. Just now, what we saw in the Passover was the spiritual calendar. Okay, so spiritual calendar got started in Exodus chapter 12, is for Passover. That is when Jesus Christ was crucified on the cross. And in that sense, when we receive Christ, we have a spiritual birthday. Now, this Feast of Trumpets is the what we call the civil or calendar, or the civil calendar or the secular calendar, not non-Christian. Okay, so they took the first day of the 7th month as their new year, this Feast of Trumpets, and it's called Rosh Hashanah in later Jewish tradition. Right, so later Jewish tradition, they practice this Feast of Trumpets as the new year for their secular calendar. And this blowing of trumpets is the blowing of the shofar, which is a ram's horn. And individuals could make voluntary additional sacrifices to express their devotion to God. Okay, so it became a new year celebration. Then we have chapter 29, verses 7 to 10 is the Day of Atonement. Day of Atonement is called Yom Kippur, and it's on the 10th day of the 7th month. Okay, 10th day, just now you saw Rosh Hashanah is first day of the 7th month. Now Yom Kippur is the 10th day of the 7th month, same month. And here the sacrificial ceremonies are described in Leviticus 16, if you want to backtrack and review the details. And it is not a happy feast. Okay, this is the special feast of the year that is not a celebration of happy things, but it's a day to reflect carefully on sin. So meditate on your life, and they have to celebrate it at a national level. Okay, so of course, each individual will reflect on himself and herself, but this event was also celebrated at a national level through the appointed sacrifice for that day. So they will have sacrifice for that day as well. Now, so when you read this Day of Atonement or Yom Kippur, there's a command to deny yourselves. Deny yourselves is also translated as afflict your souls. That is for those who need forgiveness to show humility and repentance. And afflicting the soul brought the Israelite into sympathy with the afflicted sacrificial victim. Yeah, so you are supposed to learn to identify yourself with somebody who is struggling or suffering, just as the believer identifies with Christ on the cross. Okay, so Jesus died on the cross to atone for us. Yeah. So now this Day of Atonement is for us to reflect carefully on our lives, on our sin. Okay. And that is where we deny ourselves. We may need forgiveness, right? To show humility. We need to show humility and repentance because we need forgiveness. So can seek forgiveness from God or seek forgiveness from your fellow men. And historically, for the Jews up to the modern day, Jews who observe the Day of Atonement, they normally fast for that day to afflict the soul, right? So they do not eat. They fast for that day. They do not eat, and they spend time meditating and reflecting on themselves, on their lives. And then the next one, the last one, is the Feast of Tabernacles, chapter 29, verses 12 to 39. And this one is the 15th day. And so you can see that there are 3 events on the 7th month. 7th month, there are 3 events. The Feast of Trumpets, which is the calendar, civil calendar, New Year, like for us, it will be 1st of January. And then the 10th day is for Yom Kippur, where they have to reflect on their lives. And then on the 15th day of the 7th month is the Feast of Tabernacles. If you remember, the word tabernacle is the word for the tents that the Israelites built in the wilderness when they are traveling. Yeah, the tent of God. So Feast of Tabernacles, they hold this festival for 7 days, and the people will build tabernacles for themselves using branches and leaves of trees and so on. They will build. This is also called the Feast of Booths. Yeah, the Feast of Tabernacles is also called the Feast of Booths because that's basically what they're building. They're building little booths or little tents with tree branches and leaves and all that. And for the first day, they make the offering where they have to offer 13 young bulls. Okay, for 7 days, the first day, they offer 13 young bulls, 2 rams and 14 lambs, together with the grain offering and a kid. A kid is a baby goat as a sin offering, besides the regular burnt offering. Can you see there, every festival, they are actually offering quite a lot of animals. Yeah. In fact, there's a daily offering, which they will kill 2 animals, one in the morning, one in the evening. Then the Sabbath, they will also kill some more, and the monthly, and all these special festivals. So basically, you can see that they're killing a lot of animals. Okay. Now, each new day, 1 fewer bull is required. So that means on the first day, they sacrifice 13 young bulls. On the second day, they will sacrifice 12 young bulls. On the third day, they will sacrifice 11 young bulls. On the 4th day, they will sacrifice 10 young bulls. Okay, so each new day, one fewer bull is required, but then they will still sacrifice the same number of rams. Rams are sheep, male sheep, lambs, baby sheep, and grain offerings. It could be that God is teaching them to grow in grace and increase in progressive sanctification, so that as they sin less, hopefully, then the number for sacrifices and atonement that they need will also decrease. So it's possible, we don't really know for sure, but it could be the message that this is about our progressive sanctification for us to grow in grace and sin less as we continue to learn to worship God and live the holy life. Last verse of chapter 29, Moses told the Israelites all that the Lord commanded him. You're getting the idea? You keep getting the idea that Moses obeyed God. Yeah, whatever God commanded him, Moses obeyed him. So we see that Moses faithfully teaches the Lord's commands to the people, and it is our duty and responsibility to do the same thing. It's our duty to know God's commands, to observe God's commands, and to teach to people. God's word must be carefully observed for ourselves, and then taught to each new believer, so that the community of believers may remember and do as God requires. And that will always keep us, we will not feel that, oh, Christian life is so boring. It's so, like, I'm so used to it already. So it kind of like feel a little bit draggy and familiar. But when you have to be responsible for lives, just like spiritual parenting, or when you are father or mother of a real baby, you are constantly aware of life, what you need to do, and there's no time to be bored with your Christian life. Yeah, there's no time to say, oh, Christian life so boring, so every day always the same thing. No, when we learn to observe and obey God's commands, and we teach people, we have to be a spiritual parent to teach them and watch them and look after them and guide them, so that they also can do the same. And our lives will constantly be fulfilling because we are constantly learning and teaching and also obeying God ourselves. Now, just now we talked about the sacrifices. If you remember, I said, wow, when you observe all these things, you notice so many animals are being killed, right? Every day, some animal is being killed. And then when you have special festivals and occasions, you have even more. Besides the burnt offering, yeah, just now I mentioned the burnt offering. Besides the burnt offering, you have other sacrifices to make. What does that mean? It means a lot of animals and a lot of things are being used to worship God. So you see the food for the offerings to the Lord, okay, that's what we want to talk about. First thing we want to say is it is made by fire. Yeah, when the sacrifices are made, they're made by fire. And as we saw, as an aroma pleasing to the Lord. So besides the fact just now we said, the fire is to kind of convert from a physical to a spiritual, okay? There's another point to it where fire is concerned, and that is God is not a physical God like man. That's why he doesn't want idols, and he doesn't want all those objects that we make to worship, okay? God is not physical like man, and naturally not, because he's not man, he doesn't need food to nourish him. But why this method, the method of offering food to the Lord by fire, is significant, okay? Because fire is the method that tests the quality and purity of the work man does toward God. Yes. So fire in the Bible tests the quality and purity of the work man does toward God. And you can read that in 1 Corinthians chapter 3. Okay, 1 Corinthians chapter 3, talking about the quality, what you build with, the quality that you build with on the foundation of Christ. So fire tests the quality and purity of the work God does toward man, and the trials that man undergoes. So we say baptism of fire, something like similar to that, trial by fire. So the trial is actually testing what we offer to God. What is the quality? What is the purity? And God wants his people to offer to him their best or our best, if we think of it as our self-application. Okay, God wants us to offer him our best in what we do for him and the tests, the trials, and temptations we undergo. Okay, so tests, offer to God our best, what we do when we face tests, trials, and temptations. That's very important. The number of animals, grain, oil, and wine offerings the Israelites need to offer to fulfill God's command is impressive. You remember just now I said, wow, so many animals. Yes. Okay. These sacrifices imply the agricultural prosperity God will continue to provide. See, for them to be able to offer all these animals and even the grain and the oil and the wine, it must come from somewhere. Where does it come from? It comes from God. Yeah. It doesn't come out of nowhere. It comes from God. So when God asked these people to offer all these sacrifices, you can say that in a way they are rich. Yeah, in a way you can say that they are rich because God provides all these animals and grain and oil and wine so that they are able to worship God. That means their daily life, they will also have provisions. And that is God will continue to provide to bless them in the land. So the people as the covenant people of God, remember the treasured possession. So for their part, the people are to remain faithful to God as the source of all their provisions. And so later on, this will become part of the challenge when you know the story of Elijah. You know the story of Elijah? Yeah. The story of Elijah happens because the people were not faithful to God. So God withheld all the prosperity of animals, grain, oil, and wine through drought, no rain. God stopped the rain. Okay, yeah, so we'll talk about that another time. This rain that God provides to make sure that they are able to prosper with all these animals and agriculture. So the plentiful amount of food, including unblemished animals that they offer to God, also points to the many opportunities that God's people, that means we, have in the form of tests and trials we will undergo. See, the opportunities that we can offer to God as a pleasing aroma when we give him our best. Okay, so God gives us all these prosperity. I'm not preaching prosperity gospel, okay? Yeah, this is not about prosperity gospel, but it shows that when we are faithful and obedient to God, he provides for us the things in life that we need, as well as the things that we use to worship God. So we will undergo all these tests and trials as opportunities to offer God a pleasing aroma that shows our best responses to God. And this is our spiritual worship as we offer our bodies to him as living sacrifices. Romans 12, verses 1 to 2. Okay, I didn't include all the Bible verses when I go through some of these things, is because they're very familiar. But I removed the verses so that you can see that, oh, these are actually concepts found in the Bible. Now, here's one more important point, okay? The number of sacrifices made shows what a lot of work the priests had to do. You know, to kill the animals, for sacrifice, the priests have to kill and skin them, okay? They don't magically appear by themselves all ready to be sacrificed. all the priests and the Levites, they have a lot of hard work to prepare the sacrifices. Okay, so the lot of work that the priests had to do to fulfill God's commanded offerings run for each day, each week, each month, and many times a year for the special sacrifices. So there's a lot of work to slice, to bleed the animals, drain the blood out, to cut, to dismember. Okay, you cut off the different parts, and before you chop them up into small pieces, clean them up, you present and burn. It's really a lot of work. Do you see why now they need a whole tribe of priests? Yeah, a whole tribe to be priests, because there's so much work to be done by the priests and the Levites to prepare. And that is one special reason the priesthood of Jesus is remarkable, because he sat down. He was able to sit down because his work was finished. Unlike all these priests, their work, they have to stand. They have to stand to do their work because they're busy doing so much work. But the priesthood of Jesus is amazing because he managed to finish his work and then sit down. Hebrews 10, 11, 12. Can somebody help us to read that? Hebrews 10, 11, 12.
Hebrews
Okay.
10. Okay, who is
No,
it?
Karen. Karen,
Hebrews
Yeah.
10, 11, 12. Day after day, every priest stands and performs his religious duties. Again and again, he offers the same sacrifices, which can never take away sins. But when the priest had offered for all time one sacrifice for sins, he sat down at the right hand of God.
You missed out the important word, but when this priest,
But when this priest,
and this priest is talking about Jesus, okay? Yeah.
Oh, okay,
so
okay.
these two verses, they are comparing. Verse 11 is talking about all the human priests of the Levite tribe. Every day they will stand and perform the religious duty. Every day he will offer the sacrifices which can never take away sins. Like I said just now, right? They are just animals to stand in to remind us, to represent and substitute us until the real sacrifice, that is Jesus, comes. Okay, and this priest Jesus, verse 12, offered one sacrifice for sins, and then he sat down. Why? Because it means that his work of sacrifice was effective. Okay, meaning the work of Jesus as a sacrificial lamb was effective to take away the sins of the world once and for all, so there is no need to offer sacrifices again and again and again and again, ... Like what the Levite priests had to do. They had to keep doing it day after day. So out of all the observances and celebrations, okay, so what we have just covered here about the food for the offerings to the Lord, these are the important points that we can actually understand. Now, out of all the observances and celebrations, all Jewish males are commanded to appear before the Lord in the place he chooses for 3 pilgrim feasts. Okay, and that is what we just looked at in this final table here, Passover. Okay, so the Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread, these all have special importance with regard to the life of Jesus and his work of redemption. Okay, when God says that the Jewish males are to appear before the Lord in the place he chooses, they all have importance. The Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread are clearly symbolic of Christ's atoning sacrifice on the cross. Yeah, Jesus is the lamb that died for the Passover. Then you have Pentecost. Pentecost marks the beginning of the Feast of Weeks, and that was a time of Jesus' bodily ascension. So Jesus died, Jesus resurrected, and most scholars believe that the Feast of Tabernacles not yet happened. Akan datang is symbolic of Christ's second coming when he will establish his earthly kingdom. Okay, you can see God's calendar of events. They are festivals the Jews celebrate, but at the same time, at the Christian spiritual equivalent, they have something to do with the work of Jesus Christ. Don't you think God is so amazingly wise and intelligent? Things that we would never be able to plan or imagine, God actually put into the practices, put into the Bible for our records. Okay, we finished today's session. We have just 3 minutes. Anybody would like to share some insight or share some
He still
questions?
say feast or weeks.
Sorry.
Alfred,
Yes.
Alfred, one question here. Among all the festival of trumpets, you say is secular, right?
Mm.
Is that the only one that is secular? The rest are all religious?
Okay, here's one important thing I didn't talk about. If you remember the coming of Christ, there is the blowing of trumpets. Yeah,
That's the Revelation.
that's Revelation, correct? The coming of Christ.
Mm.
Okay, so this actually represents or talks about the trumpet when Christ, the trumpet blowing that will herald the coming of Christ. So while it is a secular, it's put under the secular calendar, but spiritually it is actually hinting about that trumpet call before Christ comes.
Okay. Then this chapter 29 is Exodus, right?
No, we are at Numbers now.
Numbers, okay,
Yeah,
okay.
today we are looking at Numbers 27,
sorry.
28, 29.
Okay, then a voluntary additional sacrifice.
As expressions of their devotion. So we can present to God things that God does not ask for, but we volunteer out of our own willingness.
Okay. Then just now there was one on the unleavened bread.
Yes.
Number 1, can you go back to that one?
That's
Number 1. No, someone. Okay, this one.
Deliverance, yeah.
No. Okay. No, down, further down. There's one more, unleavened bread. Is it equivalent to the host to our Holy Communion? Some more down, I think.
Holy Communion is the Passover.
It's not the unleavened bread.
And not unleavened bread.
You have one that's talk about the unleavened bread where it is a symbolic.
Here, the absence of sin. Bread without yeast is the unleavened
Somehow
bread.
you go down, you move down again.
Okay.
Down.
Down, no more already, unleavened bread.
More. Okay. There's 1 and 2, there were 2 points, unleavened bread.
That one was the Passover and unleavened bread.
Okay.
Okay.
So unleavened bread is the the other one is the Holy Communion, right? You were saying
Holy Communion is the Passover.
Passover. Okay.
Yes, correct. The
Then
bread.
your Feast of Weeks, is weeks or week now?
Weeks.
Weeks, not week.
Pentecost.
Okay. Feast of Weeks.
Weeks, yes.
Okay.
Which is to say 50 days.
Okay.
Yeah, 50 days after the resurrection of Christ.
So basically all of them are religious, right? If you say the Feast of Trumpets.
Yes, correct. I mean, for the Jews, remember I said Jewish tradition. Yeah. So later on, this is how they took it as part of the civil calendar. But spiritually, it will point to the trumpet call before the coming of Christ. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Wow, very good. You're pointing out all the things that I missed. You clarify.
Alfred.
Thank you.
Alfred.
Yeah, John. Yes.
John here.
Yes, John. Hi.
Thank you so much tonight for this all-important lesson, which for me personally, I don't read those chapters because it's so boring, It's very tedious. I cannot get the meaning out of why they're doing all this.
Yes.
The the takeaway tonight for me is what you said. It is to establish and continue a constant relationship, all these events, all these rituals that we do with God. And I think we can apply that into our lives.
Yes.
And the significance of it is why burnt offering, nothing is left over for the, for us to eat.
Yes.
Roasted chicken is actually, what's the word you use? Something fragrance? I think
Yes,
it's in the New
aroma.
Testament. Aroma. Okay. So it's from physical to spiritual thing.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And the third thing, my takeaway is, from tonight's lesson, I get to see all these things. It's actually, we always say, the law is a law, grace came only after Christ appeared. There is grace of God here. And,
yes, you are right.
And there is the presentation of his character. Yeah, he is holy.
Yes.
His holiness, his grace is described in here.
Yes.
We cannot see God without any blood, right?
Yes.
So I think it's the first time I've seen grace in the revelation of his character. Yeah. Grace.
Congratulations. Thank you.
No, you said that Moses represented the Old Testament. Joshua got to go in despite all their sins, which is so profound, Based on the Old Testament, the sins they did over and over again, like us, well, we have Jesus. How did they ever got into the promised land, right?
Yes, yes.
Third thing I want to say is all these feasts that you mentioned, I cannot help but I live in a Muslim country, in Indonesia, in Malaysia, they get all these things. Kurban. Kurban, day of
Yes,
Kurban is a
yes.
holiday. Yeah.
The Muslim practices.
I think it's Passover, yeah. That one. I'm not sure.
Yes, similar, yes.
And then you have the New Year, Eid al-Fitr, which the Jews have also, and the Ramadan, which is the fasting, atonement, I guess.
Yes.
Starting to see where they get their what you call it, traditions from, right? From the Old Testament, the Torah.
Yes, you're right.
But my question is, why do we have to understand it from the Muslim, from the Islam, from the religion of Islam, and we never, even Christian, quite understand what the Judaism did are doing, okay? And I'm just wondering, without Apostle Paul and Jesus, how would we be able, ever be able, we Gentiles, to know of this Jehovah, this Jewish God, okay? We will never be able to, because they don't go out there and preach their Jehovah to us, their Yahweh, we don't have a synagogue in town, but we have churches, So I posted this question to a rabbi once in YouTube. You get my point? So at the end of the day, let's say Jesus did not come, Apostle Paul did not, and the 12 disciples are not commissioned to go out to the rest of the world to preach the gospel. How will we in where I am, Kota Kinabalu, ever get to know the Jewish God in Israel? Am I making sense, sir?
Everybody plays a part. You see, this is where we
No,
talk
I'm not discounting the Old Testament and the Jews. I believe they have their place in God's plan.
Yes.
I know, but I'm just saying the importance of Jesus appearing. Okay.
Yeah.
And without that, I don't think Yahweh will be known to some tribes in Papua New Guinea. Also, I want to mention another takeaway. This is an amazing Bible study, brother. Is that you said that the no, I forgot that one. I will text it to you when I recall it again. It's an important point. That's my takeaway. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Brother
Yeah,
Alfred.
very good.
This is a
Alfred, scroll
wonderful
down, scroll
study.
down.
Yes,
Alfred,
very
scroll
good
down.
takeaways. Scroll down, huh? Okay.
Here. Passover at the Feast of Unleavened are clearly symbolic of Christ's atoning. Number one, this is the one I'm talking about, where I was asking you the unleavened bread, is it also the Holy Communion?
No,
Because
it
you say it's symbolic of Christ's atoning sacrifice on the cross.
no.
Because you put the two together, Passover and Feast of Unleavened Bread.
Yeah. Passover is talking about Jesus.
Okay.
Jesus, okay, dying, and the Feast of Unleavened Bread is saying that he removes sin, and he removes sin. Okay, he died without the presence of sin, and that's how we are supposed to live our lives without the presence of sin.
Okay. Because when you read are clearly symbolic of Christ's atoning sacrifice on the cross, I thought both of them are lumped together as okay. As
Yeah,
a
it's the
communion.
Passover where he died. The Feast of Unleavened Bread is where the removal of sin in our lives.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, good. Thank you, Jacob and John, for your very good points and questions. All right, so basically what we can see is God has wisdom and as well as the omniscience, the power to make all these happen, so that he talked about Christ. Then in time, he brought about the 12 disciples as well as Apostle Paul. All these fall into God's plan as well as God's fulfillment when people cooperate with him. So this is the challenge for us then. Are we cooperating with God? Because now it is our generation where we are the people of God. Okay, and therefore it is up to us to continue the work that these people have done. Let us pray.
One more point, brother.
Yes.
Sorry, I'm so excitable tonight. You did a lot for me.
Yeah.
I recall what I was going to say that I forgot just now.
Yes.
I think God knew, based on your explanation tonight, that Jesus has to come at one point in time in history. That question has always bothered me. Why during the Roman Empire at that time? I think he knew that this is what you call it, sacrificial rituals. Is basically, it won't do, like you pointed out the verse, it won't truly take away the sin of man, right? So maybe he was just teaching obedience and all that thing to the Israelite, his people at that time.
Yes.
And when it was time to go to the Gentiles, to the whole world, I mean, the real thing has to come, and the real sacrifice has to be done.
Correct.
For us to be able to be cleansed to go to heaven one day in his holiness,
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. Okay, I'm done. Sorry.
Yes, good. Thank you. Okay. So yes, you are right. The Bible does tell us that God planned the coming of Jesus before the creation of the world. Okay. God planned the coming of Jesus before the creation of the world. God planned that Jesus should be sacrificed, the sacrificial lamb, and God also planned for us to be chosen in him to be holy and blameless before the creation of the world. So actually God planned us and Jesus before he created the whole world. That is how far back God worked. And that's why I say he's such a wise God. Yeah, let us pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you, God, for your wisdom and your love, as well as the patience that you have with us in working out your plan for little people like us who are just made of dust. And yet we think so much of ourselves, and yet you love us and you care for us. Father, we thank you, God, for all the provisions for the past, our present life, and for the future eternal destiny. And we praise you, Lord, for all your good plans for us. May we learn to be faithful, and where we are not clear or do not know, give us that faith to simply obey and walk and do as you want us to. We pray and commit all these things to you in Jesus' mighty name. Amen.